Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're gonna be reading a bunch of scary humanoid encounter stories. I just love scary stories, I love reading them, so I want to read some more for you guys. This time they're not from Reddit, but hopefully you guys will still mess with this video. I'm trying to hit 100k subs before the end of the year, and we're so close, guys. Please just subscribe. Thank you so much. Please follow my Instagram, join my Discord. I'd love to chill in a VC with you guys at some point, and yeah, let's just get straight into these stories. The man I saw through my night vision scope. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar, specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, mostly I hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I'd been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlight coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something that I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost!" There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I called BS. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. That's a trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't care in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes an animal's eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have been easily 150 yards away. F off, I screamed in that direction. He stood upright and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides my direction and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one will F you up, go away. He stayed on all fours and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards a tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck, breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told the story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, rakes, and Skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole one these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a Wendigo or Skinwalker. I'm just saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share. A creature in the Rocky Mountains. Hi y'all. This is an old story that happened to me and my then boyfriend a few years ago. I'm still new to Reddit. I only joined after telling my friend the story and she said I should post it here, so if I did it wrong, I'm sorry. Anyways, here's the story. I was probably 19 when it happened, maybe newly 20. My then boyfriend, Christopher, who I called Kit, was visiting me from Seattle to celebrate my mom's birthday in our hometown, a city called Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. I was living in Alberta, attending a university there when Kit arrived. We were planning on driving out to my mom's place together. I was very eager to introduce him to my family, and they were eager to meet him. The two of us were excited and giggly while we were getting ready to leave. I was packing up the last of my schoolwork and clothes while rambling on about what snacks we should buy for the long drive. Meanwhile, Kit, who hadn't unpacked from the flight, already had his bags in the car. He was going to drive for the first half of the drive, and I'd drive for the second half. After only a couple hours of driving, we had switched and I was driving. The sun was setting by now. I remember Kit pointing out how pretty the pinkish orange sky was. And before we knew it, it was dark. It had still been an uneventful drive. We were listening to a podcast, pointing out owls or raccoons in trash bins when we passed truck stops. Nothing of note. Until a deer appeared in the street out of nowhere. I slammed on the brakes and we stopped, maybe 20 feet from the deer, and it was just standing there, staring back at us. Not unusual for a deer, as I'm sure you all know, but it was staring for an uncomfortable amount of time. Even for a deer in headlights, like 3 to 4 minutes at least. I honked the car horn a couple of times, no response. After another couple minutes, a guy in a white Honda drove up behind us and stopped. He was honking too, and we both sat there honking at the deer. Or maybe he was honking at me honking at the deer. Anyways, eventually the deer walked off into the woods, his nose pointed in the air, and we carried on. The Honda guy was clearly in a rush because he passed us the second he got the chance, and then we were the ones following him. That's when something really weird happened. We heard a loud, deep-voiced help from a direction I couldn't quite pinpoint. It was loud enough to be heard over the podcast, yet quietly enough to seem far away. We slowed down a little bit and glanced back at each other. I suppose just wondering if we actually heard that. The Honda slowed down too. We decided it was just a background noise in the podcast, which was a true crime podcast, so it made sense, and carried on driving. When, again, we heard help me please. At this point, the podcast had ended and we slowed down again, looking out the open window. The voice was the same as the one before and sounded just as far as the one before, but we were going too fast for anyone to keep up with us. The guy driving the Honda stuck his hand out his window and gestured us to pull over. We stopped at a touristy photo area beside a lake with some factory across from it. I think it's a cement plant or something. The Honda driver and his wife both got out. They were both in their maybe late 50s and asked us if we also heard the cry for help. We said yes, and the four of us chatted for a bit about it. And then, again, from an undetermined direction, "Help, please help." The older man called out to the voice, "Hello, is someone there? Are you okay?" The voice responded, "Help, please help." And he responded, "Where are you? Are you hurt?" The voice sounded significantly closer this time, and sounded almost contorted. "Help, is someone there?" The old man, after hearing the change in the voice, went pale white. He looked at his wife, then at us, then over at the forest, and said, yet much quieter, "Hello?" And the voice, once again, though this time much deeper and even less human sounding, replied, "Help, is someone there?" We were all kind of freaked out, so the older couple called the police, as did we, and then we just went back to driving. As we continued down the road, Kid and I didn't talk. We were both wildly uncomfortable. We just watched the tree line, counting the deer we saw. Quite a few of them for so late at night, although I'm not a deer expert. Maybe they graze at night or something. We eventually arrived at my mother's house and I told her and my sisters about the event and they all got really anxious listening to it. My older sister scolded us, saying someone could have been in serious danger, and I suppose she was right, but I'm not sure. The voice it made didn't sound natural. The more it called, the less human it sounded. Every cry for help got more and more twisted. I'm not well educated on the matters of local folklore or mythology. I don't know if there's some cryptozoological boogeyman out there who could explain it. Or maybe all of us were just sleep deprived and sharing some sort of mass hysteria. I'm not sure, but it was still the creepiest moment of my life. I just found out what shadow people are. I've been able to see them since I was 7. Before I get into this, about an hour ago, I was reading some creepypastas and other r/no sleep stories, as I usually do when I'm bored at night, when I came across one that described a type of creature, a black humanoid being that was caught on the side of the witness's eyes. The witness was able to behold the whole creature with direct eye contact, further describing it as a 3-foot-tall, stretched-like shadow of a humanoid figure. When this witness actually grasped the situation and became frightened, the shadow, quote, looked as though it were startled, and sprinted towards the witness. I immediately stopped reading the story at that point and further read the comments of the thread instead. Someone apparently had named the described creature to be that of a shadow person, and I instantly Googled it, being as clueless as I was. After an hour of intense research of this seemingly familiar character, and being informed that there have been various instances of the witnessing of shadow people, I came here to tell you guys what's been going on. I've been able to see these so-called shadow people ever since I was in 1st grade, meaning I was about 7 years old at the time. I remember this vividly because the first one I saw scared the hell out of me. It was midnight and I was staying up late despite my parents telling me to go to bed, but screw that, they were asleep and I needed to catch up on my Scooby-Doo. The only light illuminating the den room was the flickering of the TV screen, and I had my Scooby-Doo comforter around my shoulders, keeping me protected from the evil monsters that lurk in the dark. After some time of rebelling against my parents and staying up, I noticed a shadow behind the television. Me, being the easily scared kid that I was, scurried out of my room to get the protector from all evil, Mom. I told her something was behind the TV and she reluctantly got up to go check. The figure was gone and she told me that I should be asleep because it's way past my bedtime. I agreed and went to bed, opening my closet door just enough so a little light could illuminate from the crack. After my mother had tucked me in and left the room, my thoughts were overwhelming me. My eyes stayed open, and of course, I see something out the corner of my eye. I glance in the general direction of the hallway that was connected to my room, and yup, that shadow was standing there alright. He didn't seem threatening though, he was just standing there peacefully watching me. Nonetheless, I still covered my entire body with my Scooby-Doo comforter. After my heart rate had returned to a natural level, I convinced myself to peek out from under the covers, and guess what? That asshole was in my room on the opposite side of my bed. Just a humanoid shadow standing there, watching me. I ducked back into my Scooby-Doo protection barrier and let out a blood-curdling scream that caused my parents to barge into my room. It had obviously disappeared right after I had screamed because my parents didn't see anything. I've had more sightings of these humanoid creatures as the days passed, becoming less and less scared of them every time I caught a glimpse of them, and occasionally even being able to directly view them. I had a feeling my father never believed me when I told him about these things, so I stopped talking about it. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to be entirely interested in this abnormality and believed me every time I told her a new sighting. She reassured me that these creatures weren't just creatures, but they were angels and that they were looking over me, so I had nothing to be afraid of. She told me I had a special gift and that I need to hold on to this gift because not everyone is capable of seeing these angels. And from that point on, I've been referring to these shadows as angels, as that's what I've grown to believe. Fast forward to middle school, I'm still able to see these angels, and they no longer scare me, unless I don't expect them at a certain point. But even then, after I realize it's just one of them, I'm not frightened. It's like you're playing hide and seek in the dark with your friends, and your friend jumps out in a Halloween mask to scare you. You get frightened for a second, but then you realize it's just the asshole of a friend playing a joke. At this point in my life, I was going through a living hell. Middle school was a terrible place for me. Friends spread rumors about me that I had no recollection of, the popular kids teased me, the bullies bullied me, and so on. I was miserable and alone, dreading day after day of torture to where eventually I fell into a depression. After weeks of being alone and still having the ability to see these shadows, I decided to try something I haven't tried before. Talk to these shadow beings. So that's what I did. I talked to them. Every time I could directly see one, and even when I couldn't, I talked to them. I told them my problems, I told them my fears, I told them about my day, I told them literally everything, and they seemed to listen. They seemed to care. I, as sad as this sounds, consider them to be my friends. I mean, they were never hostile, they never hurt me, they didn't do anything but stand there in the unexpected areas and occasionally move, but not in a threatening way. Never in a threatening way. At one point, one of them inched its way so close to me with unmoving limbs that I nearly reached out for a hug. But I didn't because I knew I couldn't. I would either frighten it off or I would go through it or something. These shadows were the only things I had at the moment and I wouldn't risk losing them. After the hell called middle school passed, my life progressively improved. And as much as it improved, I still could see these angels and I still talked to them. Like I said, they were my friends. I never told anybody, excluding my parents, but they stopped asking about them shortly after elementary school, as it seemed to be my little secret. I felt special for having this power. I am now out of school and have had the ability of seeing these shadow angels for 12 years now. It has become a part of my everyday life. I see them quite frequently, usually at night though, and have had the impression that I am one of the very few people that are able to see these things. But now, after reading a story about someone witnessing a shadow-like creature that sounds way too similar to the angels I see, my curiosity overwhelmed me and I continued to do extensive research just before posting this. I discovered that I, indeed, frequently see these shadow people humanoids. I continued to read more stories and witness accounts, and apparently these things can be hostile. They apparently can charge at people, purposefully frighten people, and even attack people. I never even thought that these shadows could do any harm to anyone, either physically or mentally. After reading all the accounts of bad occurrences with the shadow people, I have become incredibly frightened. Keep in mind, I found all this out an hour ago, so I have yet to have time to process all of this. I am terribly frightened. I'm currently staying in a hotel room in California, not because of this, for other personal reasons, and have found myself to be alone and scared. The vital fact that no one knows about my ability means that I can't turn to someone for help. I can't ask for guidance or advice. I literally have no idea what to do. I have yet to see these shadows do anything hostile, but after hearing all these stories, I don't really want to meet a hostile one. Unless they all are hostile and I'm just oblivious. I'm honestly dreading the next time I see one, since I now know what they are. I'm scared. Truly scared. What do I do to get rid of this ability? Will I be okay? Can anyone help? Please? I don't want this anymore. I'm scared. I just want to be normal. After thinking more and more about this, I'm just becoming more and more frightened. I need help. Please. Something came into my house when the power went out. It was early morning when this happened. I was gaming on my PC and had been almost the entire time since I got home from work, since the following day was my day off. There was a storm outside, but it didn't bother me since I had my noise-canceling headset on for full immersion. In-game, I was stealthily approaching my target. It was a first-person shooter, and I was only waiting for the nearest NPC to turn away so I could execute a silent kill without setting off alarm when the power cut out. Instantly, I was plunged into near-perfect darkness. There was no warning flicker, no indication at all that I was about to lose power and simultaneously lose my progress. As the fan to my PC slowly wired to a stop, I ripped off my headset in frustration and stumbled off downstairs to check the power box using my phone as a light. It was just my luck that, upon inspection, everything seemed normal. However, looking out the window, I could see the entire street was dark. The power outage must have been widespread because I couldn't see any lights at all, not even in the distance. I assumed then that the storm had knocked out the power. Rain pelted the street in aggressive wind-driven waves, trees thrashed violently, lightning lit up the sky, and I could hear the weather lashing the house mercilessly. With reluctance, I called up my provider to get an estimate on power restoration and was informed by the automated response that it would be 4 to 6 hours, but that teams had been dispatched to resolve the problem. That wasn't good enough for my liking, but there's nothing that can be done about it, so no point getting upset. I decided that the best thing I could do was just to go to sleep. It was definitely late enough at night to do so. However, I really wasn't tired at all. I ended up scrolling through social media on my phone in pitch blackness. All I could see was the screen and the weak halo of light surrounding its immediate area. That's when I heard this strange noise coming from the kitchen. It was a clattering sound like tin on tiles, as if someone had knocked something onto the floor. Now, it's important to note that I live alone and have no pets, so nothing should be falling from anywhere. Hesitantly, I removed myself from my bed to go investigate. When I got into the kitchen, there was a tin can of soup laying in the middle of the floor. I thought this was off and looked to see if I could find where it came from, but nothing else was out of place. Unsurely, I picked it up and placed it back on the bench. However, as I did this, the ambient light from my phone screen passed briefly over what I thought to be a person crouching down beside the end of the bench. A rush of fear electrified me as I dropped my phone. It landed face down on the floor and I scrambled to pick it back up. Immediately, I shone it in the direction of where I thought I had seen something. There was nothing there now. For what seemed like forever, I stood frozen in the kitchen. My heart beat so hard I could hear the blood pumping in my ears. The only protection it felt like I had was the tiny pool of light that my phone produced, and it was far from comforting. Gradually, I began to calm myself down, and the paralysis of fear began to fade as I rationalized with myself that there was nothing there, that I hadn't seen anything at all. To be sure, I went ahead and checked all the doors and windows were locked. The first few steps through the darkness were the hardest, but with each sealed entrance point, I felt more and more confident. There was definitely nothing inside with me. Nothing could get in, and all the doors were locked. Or at least that's what I thought until I got to the window at the side of the house facing the living room. It was wide open, the curtain surrounding it danced wildly in the breeze, and I felt sick. What if there was something in the house with me? Vaguely, I remember opening the window, though I wasn't sure how long ago exactly. Was it early that day, or was I remembering from the day before? I wasn't sure. After some time, I just decided to start making my way back upstairs, while all the time wondering exactly how long I had left that window open. As I made my way, a massive bolt of lightning outside lit up my house. This illuminated the entire kitchen dining room area and some of the stairs ahead. It's amazing how lightning can turn night into day. Though, to my horror, at this exact moment I saw the thing again, only this time there was no mistaking it. It was hunched over at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. It was not a fellow human, but something else entirely. Its shape was humanoid, its limbs were long and thin. It had unkempt feathers over its neck and shoulders, kind of like it was wearing a feathery poncho. The head was small in comparison to its neck, and its eyes were hollow, and it sported a beak for a mouth. However, that beak stretched up horribly at the corners as if it were smiling at me. A second flash of lightning allowed me my next glance at the thing. It had moved slightly closer and was continuing to advance. I staggered back, trying to escape the thing blindly, only to stumble and fall. I don't know where my phone went, but I dropped it and didn't bother to look for it. Instead, I wasted no time in scrambling to my feet and launching myself towards the front door. Another bolt of lightning and I couldn't see the thing anymore. Not that it mattered to me at that point. All I wanted was to get the door open, and the light from nature provided me just enough of a glimpse to know where the handle was. Within seconds, I ripped the door open and tore off into the night. Ironically, I had a car but didn't even consider using it. I ran out, my bare feet slapping against the wet pavement while the wind and rain stung my face. From somewhere behind me, I heard the creature make a god-awful screech. I don't think I could describe it, but I had never heard anything like it and I haven't since. I didn't look back to see if it was following me or not. In fact, I didn't stop running until I reached my parents' place, where I pounded on their door like a desperate drug addict until they woke up and let me in. They didn't believe what I had told them. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and maybe the worst part, I wasn't the only one who encountered something strange during that power out. At least a dozen people in my area reported seeing strange things in the darkness. American Hellhound encounter. I should start this story off by saying I do not consider myself a religious person. In fact, I actually consider myself agnostic. That being said, I 100% believe in ghosts, demons, or anything paranormal. And I've even had my own experiences with demons in the past, but that's a different story. To give a little context, I'm a 27-year-old male from a small town in southwest Indiana of about 238 people, though where I was actually born has about 60,000 people. I live out basically in the middle of BFE with my 74-year-old grandmother and have done so for the past years after a particularly nasty divorce. Anyway, there are neighbors only about 40 yards down the road from me, but it's relatively quiet out there. My house is an older home built at the turn of the 20th century, but it has been updated with motion-activated porch lights and other modern equipment. Down both sides of my road, there's literally nothing but cornfields and wooded areas, so you can pretty much guess how quiet it is out here. This encounter happened one winter night when I was the only one in the house awake. I work the night shift at my job, so a healthy sleep schedule is all but non-existent for me, so it's not abnormal for me to be up at all hours of the night. I was lounging on the couch playing on my phone during a pretty decent snowfall. We didn't have internet at the time, so I spent my time going through Facebook Marketplace, as I tended to do whenever I wanted to buy a new project car to work on. I look up from my phone and I see the biggest whitetail buck I've ever seen. He had to be close to 250 pounds, if not bigger. So, fascinated, I sat and watched this buck walk around and graze for a while. Everything was calm when out of nowhere a huge black furry mass leapt out from God knows where and tackled this deer to the ground. There was a struggle for a solid 10 to 15 seconds before the buck stops struggling and goes limp, and I finally get as good of a look as I could through the snowfall. The only way I could describe this thing was it looked like a big black wolf. Now, wolves originally were native to Indiana, but were all but wiped out in the wild during the 19th century due to habitat loss and industrialization, so we don't see them around here anymore. That being said, coyotes are still a very common sight around here, but they usually hunt in packs. This thing was alone. Once the deer was dead, this creature began to settle down and stood back up on all fours. I couldn't believe the size of this thing. Keep in mind, I'm on the shorter side for a male, standing at about 5'6" and weighing about 198 pounds. This thing had to have been 5 feet, even at the shoulders, on all fours. Its pitch black fur made it hard to pick out any distinguishable details, but not impossible thanks to the full moon that was out that night. I can't recall what the exact time was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was about 12:30 a.m. to 1 in the morning, around there. I let out a gasp when this creature leapt out of the darkness and took this deer down like it was nothing. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't speak. I could only watch as a wave of terror washed over me. My eyes firmly locked on it as it began to carry the buck away in its jaws. Its teeth were abnormally large, easily 4 or 5 inches in length, and I could barely make out small definitions of muscle underneath its fur. As it began to carry its next meal away, I saw its eyes. They practically glowed in the dark, as red as the embers of a fresh bonfire. They stared directly at me while all I could do was watch, frozen in fear while my heart hammered in my ears and my hands shook violently. I could feel my breath pick up pace as I watched this dog-like creature carry this enormous buck into one of the tall trees across the road, and just like that, it disappeared. I didn't see it the rest of the night. The only thing I could do was try my best to get some sleep. I wish I could say that this was the last time I saw the thing. It was not. I woke up the following morning still trying to wrap my mind around what I saw, or if I had hallucinated the whole thing. Once I got some breakfast, I got dressed and went outside to see if I could find any details to convince me it was all real. There were no paw prints, no blood, no signs of a struggle thanks to the snow having covered up the evidence of the previous morning. I was starting to think maybe it had all been a dream, until I look up in the tree line and all I see is the buck, what was left of it. Whatever had attacked it last night had nearly eaten the entire animal, leaving only the skull and spine sitting nearly 30 to 40 feet high in the branches of the now blood-soaked tree. I was horrified. I quickly gathered myself and went about my day and thought that would be the end of it, until about 2 weeks later. As I said before, it wasn't unusual for me to be up at all hours of the night. As I type this story, it's about 3:15 a.m. right now where I live. Now, I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. I've slept through earthquakes, hurricanes, literal bombs going off, you name it. With that being said, I was actually asleep this time. I'm not entirely sure what the exact time was, but I had gone to bed at around 11 p.m. the previous night, which is early for me. All of a sudden, I woke up from a deep sleep with a sense of overwhelming dread coursing through my body. The porch light was on. Everything within me was telling me not to get off the couch where I sleep, to just lay there and try to go back to sleep. However, I felt the intense urge to investigate what was making me feel this way, as one normally does. With the blanket still over my body, I pick up my head and look out the window, the same window where I saw this thing the first time. And there it was. This thing was staring directly at me. We locked eyes for what felt like hours, though in reality it was more likely a couple seconds. The second I saw those burning red eyes staring at me, my blood ran cold. Once again, with fear gripping me like a vice, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even call or scream for help. The only sound I could make when I saw this thing was a half gasp, half sob as I felt the urge to cry in fear. The second I laid eyes on this thing snarling at me through my window, my first instinct was to cower under the covers like a little kid. Yes, childish, I know, but at the time I didn't know what else to do. I waited for several minutes, praying to God if he existed, that this monster wouldn't break into my home and make me its next victim. I could hear it walking around the front porch for several minutes, its long claws clicking against the cement as it paced back and forth. Then it screamed. The sound this thing made was the most eerie, horrifying screech that chilled me to the bone and made me feel nauseous. It sounded kind of like an old steam engine train whistle mixed with a wolf howl, if you can imagine that. I could never even hope to try and replicate that awful noise. Finally, after several long minutes, the sounds all died down and the motion lights shut back off, making me breathe a sigh of relief. Now, as I said before, I'm not a very religious person. In fact, I'm probably the least religious person in my family of Christians. That being said, I'm still not entirely sure what it was that I saw those nights, but after the second encounter, I did a little reading and everything I saw points to it being a possible hellhound. Unfortunately, hellhound sightings are exceedingly rare around these parts, but stories of these creatures date back to the 1600s in Connecticut. For those that don't know, a hellhound is a creature said to be the guardian of the underworld, like Cerberus from Greek mythology, who is said to be a large three-headed black dog that guards the gates to Hades and swallows the souls of the damned. Other folklore describes them as an omen of death, like the one cited in Connecticut or the surrounding states, with a popular saying that goes, "If you meet the black dog once, it shall be for joy. If twice, it shall be for sorrow, and the third time shall bring death." Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I've seen this thing a total of 4 times, and each time I've never once felt joy, sadness, or any other emotion besides pure primal fear. Thankfully, I've not spotted it in several months. I hope to keep it that way. I don't think shooting it will do anything but piss it off, so I can only pray to God if he exists that this thing isn't hungry enough to commit breaking and entering for its next meal. I understand that some will read this and think I'm making all this up, and that's fine. But I know what I saw, and this creature I saw on those nights was very, very real. Skinwalkers in southern Ontario. This is my own personal account and also my friend's multiple encounters. I started listening to this podcast about a year ago. My favorite stories are those of skinwalkers and wendigos. Let's start with my encounter. I'm an 18-year-old boy from rural southern Ontario, Canada. I'm currently in college and I often get home late due to the professors having other jobs and teaching us on the side. In late November, I noticed when I would come home, I would go to unlock the house, but when I did, there wouldn't be a sound. For context, I live in a main side road with the bush dotted along the road and my house being situated across from a bush along 2 rows of trees to one side and the back of the house being more bush. For about 2 months, I shrugged it off as cold pushing all the animals south or them hibernating. That was until one night I was taking the garbage out to the laneway late at night due to the garbage truck coming early in the morning. As I rolled them to the end of the laneway, I noticed a pair of eyes staring at me through the bushes. I instantly felt dread pour through my body and I booked it to the house. I looked back and nothing. Not a light in sight except for the house lights. I shrugged it off as the house lights reflected off something in the bushes. That was my first 2 signs of something watching me. My last encounter was around a month and a half ago. I got out of my truck to go inside the house through the garage, and as I was about to open the garage, I heard a blood-curdling scream in the middle of our field. It sounded like it was 400 feet away. It took me a second to realize, and in that moment, I quickly opened the garage door and booked it inside. Since then, things have gone back to normal. I hear birds and owls at night and even coyotes. Until last week. It's been spring and birds should be out chirping and crickets out and about, but I don't hear a thing. I'm scared because I know it's watching me and I don't know what it has planned for me. If anyone has any ideas, that would be great. Thanks. Now onto my friend's story. This also takes place in Ontario and he's had 3 encounters with what I think might be a skinwalker. I'll try to tell it from his perspective. I was on my way to my girlfriend's dad's cabin in Ontario around Algonquin. We were about 20 minutes away from his place and the drive was peaceful. We were both exhausted from the long journey. Everything was going well until I saw a dog on the road. It was about a kilometer away, just sitting there, not moving. I started slowing down and flicking my high beams off and on, but it wouldn't move. I slowed down about 3 meters in front of it. My girlfriend said, "WTF, why is it just sitting there?" I shrugged and watched it closely. The dog then got up and started walking around the passenger side of the car, not breaking eye contact with me. I kept eye contact until it was around the back of the car. "I think that's the neighbor's dog," said my girlfriend. "They have 2 dogs and it could have gotten out." "Okay, I'm going to walk to the house and see if they're home and if their dogs are there. You go grab it," she said. I nodded as we both got out and went our separate ways. I could see the dog through the car's taillights and the house's spotlights. As I started walking after it, it began moving away in a kind of sidestep, all while keeping eye contact with me. Odd, I thought. How is it keeping pace with me when I'm walking? I decided to start jogging after it, and somehow it kept pace with me. Then it started getting faster. It was strange. I was jogging and it was walking faster than me. It started barking in the same monotone every time, like it was programmed to the same pitch and everything. It then ran backward into the ditch and I followed it. By now I was about a kilometer away from the car, so I couldn't see anything. I could hear it barking, but it seemed farther away. I went into a sprint and got to where it sounded like it was coming from, and nothing. I heard more barking farther away. It's not possible for it to run that fast, right? I thought. I then pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. As I did, I saw it run across the road into the opposite ditch. Then something strange happened. It got up on its hind legs and ran into the trees on its hind legs. I froze. When I got out of my state of paralysis, I realized I was a kilometer away from the car. I turned around and started running back to my girlfriend about what I saw. Just then, my blood started pumping. My body pushed itself into a sprint. I had gone into fight or flight mode. It felt like that thing was right on my heels. I sprinted faster than I ever had before. As I drew close to the car, I saw my girlfriend running to the car. "Get in," she said. "We have to get out of here," she yelled. We both hopped into the car and gunned it down the road. I looked in the rearview mirror and that dog was sitting in the road about 5 meters from where the car was. "What happened?" she said. I took a breath and told her what happened. She started crying and told me what she saw. I walked up to the house. No one was home, but the door was open and the screen door was shut. I peered inside and saw both dogs asleep on the couch. I don't know what you were chasing because you were chasing a replica of one of their dogs. I heard footsteps and saw you running and I knew something was wrong. We were both shaken and got to the cabin and had a sleepless night. That was my buddy's first experience. His second experience happened at the cabin he stayed at, about 20 minutes from where the first encounter was. My girlfriend and I were staying at our cabin in the woods one weekend. We had a good time and went to bed drunk. I woke up in the night with a dry throat, so I went to get some water. As I was drinking the water, I had an itch to smoke a cigarette. I opened the screen door and walked along the wet grass due to the dew and the night air. I pulled out my pack of cigarettes and lit one. It was a peaceful night, quiet. I was half asleep, so I didn't notice the lack of noise around me. As I took a drag of the cigarette, I noticed a coyote walking up. This thing's got balls, I thought. As I kept smoking, the large coyote walked about 10 meters from me, got up onto a picnic table, and sat. As I looked at it, it seemed off. It had patches of fur missing, was skinny, and sat like a human would sit, as if acting like a dog. Its joints were abnormally large, and it was all skin and bone. Somehow, it didn't register in my head that this thing was off. I finished my cigarette and flicked it towards the thing in front of me. Both the coyote and I watched it fall to the ground. I stared at the cigarette for a second, looked up, and nothing. It was gone, like it had never happened. Wow, I must still be drunk, I mumbled as I turned away and walked inside and back to bed. That was the second encounter with something odd. My friend's last encounter was again in the same place on yet another weekend. In the fall of 2023, my girlfriend and I were at her dad's cabin in southern Ontario. It was a weekend of just her and me drinking with ourselves and the cats. It was a good night of drinking. At around midnight, we were watching a movie when I noticed something seemed off. There were no birds or crickets, not a sound. I shrugged it off and kept watching the movie. But as the movie came to a close, dread flooded my body. I felt fear prickle over me as I looked over at the two cats living in the cabin. They were looking at the door, their hair straight up, meowing weirdly. My girlfriend started getting scared and I tried to reassure her. As I was doing so, I heard a thump upstairs. "What the hell was that?" my girlfriend whispered/screamed. "I don't know, but I'll check it out," I said. I grabbed the machete that was beside the door and went upstairs with the wood creaking all around me. It had to be a possum or a raccoon, I thought, as I hit the top of the steps. As I walked through the upstairs, I noticed that the noise was coming from the roof. I could hear something walking on the roof, and it wasn't light. I hustled downstairs, but had to keep calm as I saw my girlfriend, who was crying. "It's fine, it's nothing. Probably just a raccoon walking on the roof trying to get in." I made up a quick lie to calm her down. I went around the house, shutting the windows and locking everything up. As we huddled in the blankets and talked about what was happening, we both heard a distorted scream from the woods. It sounded like a man or woman scream, but distorted. It screamed for 10 seconds and sounded like it was screaming as it ran away. After that, we stayed frozen in place until morning, not sleeping one bit. We packed everything and left as soon as we could and made it home. As dumb as I am, I'm probably gonna go back with her, but more armed in case it decides it wants to fight. The Watcher in the Woods. One summer night, I found myself alone in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, a place to disconnect from the digital world and immerse myself in nature. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, craving the solitude and the quiet that the city could never offer. The first couple of days were blissful. I spent my time hiking, reading, and sitting by the lake, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. The cabin was small but cozy, with a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that boasted a large stone fireplace. It was the perfect escape. One evening, as the sun began to set and the forest grew dim, I decided to take a walk. The air was cool and the sounds of the forest at dusk were both calming and eerie. I wandered down a narrow path that I hadn't explored before, enjoying the twilight. After about half an hour, I noticed the light fading faster than I'd anticipated. Not wanting to get lost, I turned back towards the cabin. As I retraced my steps, I heard a faint rustling in the underbrush. I stopped, straining to hear. The forest was usually alive with nocturnal sounds, but this was different. It was deliberate, like someone or something was following me. I quickened my pace, the uneasy feeling growing stronger with every step. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had disappeared completely and darkness had settled over the woods. I bolted the door behind me and laughed at my paranoia. It was just the forest, I told myself. There's nothing out there. I lit a fire in the fireplace and settled into an armchair with a book, trying to shake off the lingering unease. Hours passed, and I began to doze off when a loud bang jolted me awake. The noise had come from outside near the back of the cabin. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the rear window. Shining the beam outside, I saw nothing but the dense trees and undergrowth. I told myself it was probably a falling branch or a raccoon scavenging for food. I was about to turn away when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes reflecting the light from my flashlight. They were low to the ground, watching me from the edge of the forest. I froze, unable to move, my breath caught in my throat. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared back at me with an unsettling intensity. After what felt like an eternity, the eyes disappeared. I stood there for several minutes, waiting to see if they would return, but the forest remained silent. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one, and finally returned to the armchair, though sleep was now out of the question. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I packed up my things and left the cabin earlier than planned. As I drove away, I glanced back at the forest and saw those eyes again, watching me from the shadows. Shaken but determined to understand what I had seen, I did some research on the area when I returned home. I discovered local legends about a creature known as the Watcher, said to inhabit those very woods. Stories of glowing eyes following unsuspecting travelers were common, though sightings were rare. The legend varied, some describing the Watcher as a guardian of the forest, others as a malevolent spirit. I reached out to a few locals, hoping to learn more. Most were dismissive, chalking it up to folklore, but one old man took my inquiry seriously. He told me his own story of encountering the Watcher as a young man. His description matched mine: glowing eyes, silent observation, and a profound sense of being watched. He warned me never to return, suggesting that those who ignored the warning often disappeared without a trace. Years have passed since that night, yet the memory remains vivid. I still find myself drawn to the forest, wondering about the Watcher and the truth behind the legend. Despite the lingering curiosity, I have heeded the old man's warning and stayed away. The forest, with its secrets in its eyes, remains a place that I admire from afar, content to let its mysteries remain unsolved. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was just an animal, or maybe it was something else entirely, but I haven't been back to that cabin since, and I don't think I ever will. Something is tormenting my family. I've lived in southern Alaska with my family my entire life. My whole family has stories about our property, and I've decided to share them. These stories are spread out over the 11 years that we've lived here. I don't remember the order, so I'll be telling them as I go. I'll be using fake names for everyone and just the first initials of friends and pets. The first story that comes to mind about this place is the voice in the woods. Our property is 50 acres and about 75% of it is woods. My siblings and I would spend hours out there, but now we rarely go out there at all. Now I have a very large family, and we all live on this property except for my two oldest siblings. I live here with my grandpa, mom, dad, older twin sister, two little sisters, and two little brothers. The first time we heard the voice, it was just my little sister Allie and me. I was 13 and Allie was 11. The weather was warm during the middle of June, and we wanted to ride our dad's black four-wheeler around the trails. We were on the other side of the property having fun and even stopped for a moment to play in the river. Then we started to smell something bad. So bad that it made me gag and stop the four-wheeler. It smelled like a rotting animal that's been sitting in the sun for a week. We didn't want to know what was dead and didn't want to stick around. I had started to drive away down another trail when I heard Allie yell my name, Lynn. I stopped the four-wheeler and turned to see what was wrong, but she just looked at me, confused. When I asked her what, she said she hadn't said anything. I figured it was just in my head, but before I could continue driving, we heard it again. Lynn. I could feel Allie's body go still behind me as she stared ahead. Something called my name in Allie's voice, and it was coming from in front of us where the smell was. I immediately felt the fight or flight response in me, along with the reaction to protect my little sister, and turned around as fast as I could, flooring it back to the house. I nearly flipped the four-wheeler twice and almost hit a tree. I felt like something was watching us as we were leaving. Our dad saw the way I was driving on his new four-wheeler and I got in trouble. Neither Allie nor I told her that what happened because we didn't want him to think we were too scared to be playing in the woods by ourselves anymore. I didn't go back into the woods for a few weeks. The second time we heard the voice was when we were all in the woods except for my older brother. It was me, my two older sisters, Mary and Reen, and my two younger sisters, Allie and Jolene. I was 15 this time. Mary, Reen, and Jolene were on our grandpa's six-wheeler. Allie was riding our mom's four-wheeler and I was riding our dad's. We'd been out there for a while and were racing when we knew we weren't supposed to. We were also on the other side of the property again, so we couldn't get caught. Allie was close behind me and Mary was in front around the turn. She was waiting for us to catch up. As we sat there listening to Mary brag about winning, we all heard our mom yell, "Girls?" Thinking mom was finally home from the store with dinner and needed help bringing in the groceries, we sped to the house, slowing down before we got close enough that she could hear us so she wouldn't think we're speeding around. When we got there, mom was just getting out of her car. We parked the four-wheelers and got off, walking over to our mom. We asked her why she had called us and what she needed, but she looked at us strangely. She told us that she had just come down the driveway and she didn't call us. She wasn't at the house when we were called. Then I realized something that made my heart race and my blood run cold. Even if mom had been at the house, there's no way we would have been able to hear her from the other side of the property, especially with the two four-wheelers and the six-wheeler running. I didn't want to tell my sisters about that because I didn't want to scare them. The last time I heard the voice was only last month. I'm 19 now. I had a falling out with a close friend who had been to my house many times in the past. I'll call her In. It was 8 in the morning and I was heading to my Jeep about to leave for work. Purse on my shoulder, full coffee cup in hand, I was ready to go. Then I heard In's voice coming from the woods. Help. I stood there for a second, confused and just staring into the woods, waiting to see if it would happen again. Was someone on our property? But soon I felt panicked and quickly got back inside because something about the voice was familiar. Other than the fact it was In's, I felt uneasy. In hasn't been to my house in 3 years. Something about the voice was wrong. It was as if it were whispered and calm, not the way someone would be calling for help if they needed it. The voice also didn't sound organic, like it was a recording, but not from a radio or phone. It didn't make any sense, and because I didn't want to hear it again, I tried to convince myself that it was just nothing. I ended up running to my Jeep like a scared little kid, locking all the doors once I was inside. I took one more look at the woods and didn't see anything, so I left for work, driving a little faster than I should have up the driveway. I loved telling my coworker all the scary stories about my house because it would freak her out. When I got to work and told her what happened, she was jumpy for a few hours. And it really didn't help when one of our brooms fell off the wall without us being near it. I told her someone probably just didn't put it back in the hook properly, and it seemed to calm her down just a little. In has been in those woods before, and she knows how scary they can be. About 5 years ago on the 4th of July weekend, she and I were playing hide and seek with my family in the woods. We were hiding together in a very small ravine in the center of the woods. It was hidden by bushes and devil's clubs. I remember the devil's club well because I got a blister on my ankle that hurt like hell. In and I played rock, paper, scissors as we were hiding. We heard walking coming toward us and thought we were going to get caught. A rule in my family when playing hide and seek is you're not allowed to leave your spot. We watched someone in a white hoodie and black pants walk by us. They would have seen us if they looked to their right and down, but they didn't. We were eventually found by my older brother and walked back to the house with my auntie, who was also found. It was girls versus boys, and the boys won. It was perfect timing as well because my mom and grandma had just finished making dinner, but as In and I were getting ourselves some very full plates, I realized no one was wearing a white hoodie. It's okay, they probably took it off. But also, no one was wearing black jeans. I asked my dad if anyone had changed in the bathroom or something. Maybe they had thorns in their pant sleeves, but he told me he didn't think so. In and I told him about the person we saw walking past us, and he was worried, thinking someone was on our property. He also didn't like the thought of a trespasser in the woods with all his daughters hiding. My dad took 3 of my uncles and went into the woods. They were gone for about an hour. They must have checked the entire property. My dad even called my mom and told her to ask me where we saw them. When they got back, my dad said they hadn't seen anyone and sat down in the living room with everyone else. My uncles, on the other hand, were talking very quietly. I knew only my Uncle Jay would tell me what was wrong, and I was right. It had rained a few hours before we went to play in the woods, meaning it was muddy. My Uncle Jay told N and me that they didn't see any footprints anywhere near the spot we were hiding other than us two girls and my brothers. I was paranoid all night that night that I would see the person in the woods walk by my window. The last time N was in those woods was when she, I, and our friend T decided to go camping out there. It was the end of summer and us three girls wanted to go camping one last time before winter. We were too young to go camping by ourselves, so the next best thing was the woods on my property. Our campsite was pretty much dead center of the woods. We had my mom and dad's big tent that could fit 5 people and my grandpa's 6-wheeler. My two friends T and N were so excited they didn't care about the stories. Honestly, so was I, and I wish I wasn't. We'd gotten settled in our tent and started to play with the deck of cards I'd brought us. As it got later and darker, well, as dark as it can get in Alaska, we decided to get comfy in our sleeping bags so we would be warm. Ann and I wanted to tell stories. T didn't believe in the paranormal, but listened to Ann and me talk about our favorite horror stories and urban legends. Ann and I, when talking about the Wendigo stories, would say the W instead of the actual name because we believe that by saying its name, it would summon it. Ann is an Alaskan native and so is her family. Her mom is the one who told us to never say the creature's name. T knew what we were talking about, and I'm pretty sure she knew not to say it, but she did anyways. What exactly is the Wendigo? T asked us. Ann and I whipped our heads in her direction, and I shouted that you should never say that word out loud. T only rolled her eyes and laughed. She wouldn't have been laughing if she had known what awaited us. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning when Ann woke me up. She whispered to me that she'd been awake for maybe an hour and she could hear something walking around. My dad let me bring my mom's pistol with us after he promised to be very careful with it and that I'd be the only one to touch it when absolutely necessary. I kept it near my sleeping bag. I was on the left side of the tent. N was in the middle and I could see T was still asleep on the right side. N was a very light sleeper and was woken up by T snoring. She was trying to go back to sleep when she heard something. I listened carefully and I could hear something walking around. It wasn't very close, but it was close enough that we needed to pay attention. I thought it was maybe a moose, bear, or something else. That was quickly shut down when I realized that it sounded like it was on 2 legs and not 4 like I was expecting. N reached over and shook T awake, putting her finger over her mouth to show T to be quiet. Then N pointed to her ears. T listened and looked at us confused. I shrugged my shoulders, showing that I had no idea what it was. I kept my hand on my mom's pistol just in case. I got up my phone and saw that it was 2:50 a.m. I texted both my mom and dad saying that I could hear something walking around our campsite. They didn't respond. I wasn't surprised because it was past midnight and my mom just had my baby brother the week before. We listened as it got closer to our tent. We were now scared that some animal was gonna rip a hole in our tent and get us. It was getting closer to my side, so as quietly as we could, Ann and I scooted closer to T. Then we could smell it. It smelled so much like BO that I could almost taste it. T covered the bottom of her face with her blanket and N was covering her nose with her hand. N looked to T and mouthed something that I couldn't see, but I could see the fear in T's eyes. Later, I found out N had mouthed the word Wendigo to her. We stayed quiet out of fear. We refused to even move. Even breathing felt too loud. We didn't want to let the thing outside know that we were in the tent. Whatever was out there felt evil. I tried to listen as close as I could, but it was hard because my heart was beating so loud. I'm pretty sure N and T could hear it. The sound of walking went around and stopped near the front of our tent. I was ready to shoot whatever it was through the tent. It was only a few seconds of silence, but it felt like hours. Then we heard the sound of a gunshot. We all jumped and N gasped. It was loud, and I knew who it was. Our neighbor had a large collection of shotguns and would have target practice almost every day. I don't know what my neighbor was shooting at in the middle of the night, but I believe he saved our lives that night. He wasn't close enough to be shooting at the thing outside our tent or even know that us girls were camping out there. We could hear the thing run past us and toward the river, away from us, my house and our neighbor. It was fast. We sat there for a long minute, huddled together on one side of the tent, shaking. N asked in a hushed voice if we should go back to the house, but I was too afraid to leave the tent. I was scared the sound of the 6-wheeler would bring it back, and I didn't want to leave all of our stuff out here. So we just went back to sleep, pressed tight against each other. I don't think we could have been closer, and I'm not sure if N really did sleep that night. The next morning, when we had the courage to leave the tent, we could see small moose prints around our tent. I tried to ignore the fact that it looked like it was standing on 2 legs, and I just hoped that it was a curious baby moose. N and T came to my house a bunch after that, but we never camped in the woods again. T and I still go camping together, but we make sure to go somewhere else. That wasn't the only time T experienced something here. One day when T was staying over, she woke me up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure when this was, but I believe it was sometime near Christmas. She was sleeping on my bed and I was on the floor. It only took me a few seconds to realize why she'd woken me up. I could hear light tapping on my window. I looked up where I thought T's face was. Now, I live in the basement of my house. Half my room is underground and the top half is on ground level. There are no trees or bushes near my window, so it couldn't be a branch. 1/3 of my window was covered by snow. It was in the winter and completely dark. The tapping lasted about another 30 minutes. T and I were just holding each other's hands, trying not to freak out. T was obviously more freaked out because she'd been awake longer. I'm not sure who it was, but someone turned on the light in the upstairs bathroom, illuminating the backyard and my room. The tapping immediately stopped. I didn't want to move, but I needed to take advantage of the light. I stood up on my bed near T's feet and looked out the window. At first, I didn't see anything until I looked a little harder. In the woods across the river, I thought I saw a tall person standing in the tree line. They were thin, with long arms and legs, and their skin was almost white. I hope it was just my mind playing tricks on me and it was just a strange looking tree, but when I look out my window now at that same spot, I see nothing like I did that night. No tree out there looks even a little bit like that thing. After making sure my window was locked, I got off the bed and went to sleep, trying to forget about the tapping and the tall creature.